So guys, I just want to show you a little introductory video to show what I've done so far. So as you can see, this is the type of hardwood that I got. It is maple hardwood, and if you look at it from the side, you can tell that aside from this stain, it's one contiguous material all the way through. Actually, for example, I have some plywood here that I can show you guys. So what you're on the lookout for when you're buying this stuff is that you want to make sure that it's real hardwood, assuming that you care, but the actual hardwood is very strong and has a certain prestigious appeal to it, I would say, that I have a full maple floor in my van, right? But you can see here that this plywood is made out of several layers of material, so this makes it a, I guess, artificial piece of wood. It is actual wood that was used to make this plywood, but it was glued together, and there are certainly advantages to doing that. For example, it can make the material much straighter than it is naturally, but this is actual maple hardwood, at least as far as I'm aware, but I can definitely tell it's a real piece of wood. Now, basically the way that they normally install these type of maple floors is that when they install them ordinarily, they are installing them into a house that already has wood underneath it. So they butt it up against the wall and hammer it in, and then drive little nails in here to make sure that it butts up right against the next piece perfectly. We don't have that advantage here because we're installing it on what's really a metal floor, although I put the rubber floor mats back underneath just for a bit of vibration and sound deadening. So what I'm doing here is essentially a little bit more like furniture making, where I have my wood glue over there, which I forgot to bring up here for my tools, but we're putting a really nice bead all the way along all of the facets. It takes a little bit of time to make sure that you do that correctly, and then you hammer all the pieces together nicely, and by the time you have a piece this big, it's pretty heavy, so you can hammer your pieces of hardwood up against it and it's not going to move anything. It's just going to butt them up nicely against each other. That's basically how I'm doing it. When I'm done, this will all be like basically a big table, like one solid piece of wood. If it ever has to be taken out again, I'm sure that can be done, and I can crack the glue seams in between if I try hard, but it should be strong enough to at least walk on. Now the other thing is that unfortunately this van floor isn't perfectly smooth. It rises up in certain areas, and also there's a seam that I could show you guys a picture of that separates the maxi van's rear section from the front section, and it comes up like maybe a 1/4 of an inch or something. So I took little pieces of plywood. I have some, I think this is probably 1/2 inch plywood, and maybe 3/8 plywood. I have a variety of different thicknesses basically, and I can kind of find spots where they fit nicely and stabilize the wood, because basically the wood seems to be sitting on either edge and on a couple of other high points. But the problem is that when you step on it, then you're bowing the entire piece right in the middle. So I put these little supports, like 2 on each length, and then another 2 at a different spot, and another 2 at a different spot as I go up. And that basically makes it so that you can't really move this wood at all, no matter how much weight you put on it. Basically all I'm doing is I need a speed square, a little pencil, a skill saw. If you have to do some more complicated cuts and you want to do a pretty job of it, you may also want to add a jigsaw, but I would contend that that might not even be necessary. And also you can do some slightly curved cuts using the skill saw, but not too much. Hacksaw is also useful if you... A hacksaw can also be useful if you don't want to drag out your jigsaw and you just need to cut a little bit of wood off. Alright, so let's start placing some wood, and I'll mention any other things as I remember them. Alright guys, so getting ready to do the next row of the wood, you can see that we're coming up to the footwell here on the side of the van. The first thing I want to determine is, do we need to cut the board along this way at all to make it fit into here? And I don't think that we do actually. It's really, really close. I mean, you could if you were being really picky, but I think it's so close to the actual width of the footwell there that we might just leave it and put a little bit of oak in here just to cover that little edge. Now the other thing I'm looking at here is that because these sections that I'm running are going to be kind of joining these thinner parts in back to the big section up here, I want to use few boards through some of these sections to make it extremely strong. And I especially want to use a longer board for the piece that I'm going to cut out around the heater there, because I want to have a board big enough that I can get a really strong hold on it up here while I'm cutting down there. And if I have a small board, like one of these shorter ones, it's just not going to give me the control in order to cut that. But I think we'll get pretty close to the length, the total length we need by joining these two long boards. And if I need a bit extra, I'll cut one of these butt pieces to just fill in that little edge there. So let's take some measurements of that, see where we want to cut it, and then we'll come back. Now this, guys, is where our speed square will come into play. So as you can see on this end, we're going to have this little male part of the wood connection. So we'll have to account for that as we are cutting this piece. Let me just measure it on this side here first. So it looks like I say, I want to butt this up so that as if it's kind of sticking in there. And one way to do that is just sit it on top like that. And probably leave myself a 1/4 inch or something to either side of clearance, just in case there's a mistake. Gonna put a little mark there. Now there's a mark right there on the edge. I don't know if you guys can see that. Let's grab our speed square. I'll try my best to keep this in frame, but at the same time, it can be hard. Let's match up our speed square to where that is. Looks pretty close with this groove here where we want to cut. Now the next thing, like I say, is that we want to get the length correct. So we'll butt it up against there. I'm going to just butt it a little harder than normal because I'm going to lose a bit of distance as I cut that little edge piece off. And I'm going to put a little mark here just to where I want to have the end. That'll look great. Let's put our speed square on there. Okay, so now we have two lines. We have this line here and this line here. Now, just so I don't get confused, I'm going to put a cross around the part that I'm going to discard, which I think will be this part here. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but it'll be this part here, I think. So let's put a big cross across here. This piece will be cut out and discarded. So I'll go cut that with skill saw and we'll be done. So first we're going to cut this male lip off. There we go. Next we will, I think, make this cross cut here. I'm going to go as far as I can and then stop so that I can come from the other side, and we'll see if we can get a fairly clean cut because we don't want the blade to show on the blade marks to show on the other side. And then we'll do the inline cut grain here. Let's make sure we got a good hold on it. Like I said, that's why I want a large board. Now, because the blade is a circle, you can see that I cut slightly beyond here on the other side, but there is a section on the upper side that we did not cut. I do want to be quite careful about that so that I don't accidentally go too far, but we'll try going a little farther this way and see if we can get a pretty clean cut from the top perspective at least. Well, I think we're going to do it. Pretty decent, I think. Now, as you can see from the top, you can actually barely see the extra distance that I cut, so pretty clean job. Let's see if how this will install, and then we'll cut our next piece as required. All right. So to me, this looks absolutely perfect. We lined this up very, very well. So let's come back and measure the next piece in a moment. All right, so we are going to start by gluing in this end piece. Like I say, this is the one that I really wanted to line up. So this is what we are going to start off with and base everything else around that. All right, so take your wood glue and let me just pull this piece back out. Now, when I glue these pieces together, the top will be the parts that mate. I'll try to show this as well as I can in the camera, but when I put these together, the tops will mate, but the bottoms won't really mate as well. So I'm going to focus most of my glue along the top and along the bottom surfaces that will mate. The main one we're going to want to hit is this front top surface, because that's really going to hold the top of the flooring together. So I'm going to hit this outer surface along the male part of the joint, and then the bottom of that I hit as well to give us a little bit of holding power on the bottom of the wood. Like I say, I don't really do this edge because it appears to not even touch the succeeding board in most cases, but that will kind of depend on your flooring as well. Make sure it goes in there really well. Wipe away any excess wood glue. If you have paper towels, you can use that too, but I use way too much paper towels and I'm always out. One other tip that I'll show you guys here is that because the hardwood strength is based upon all of them interlocking and being glued together into basically one giant sheet, what you want to do is you want to stagger the joints in your wood, as you can see. So as best as you can, you don't want any of the joints in your wood to line up into one big joint, because then they could fracture along that point and come apart. As you can see, none of my joints line up one against the other, and that's definitely what you want to try to do. Alright, so next up we're going to do this end of the run. Now, the tricky part is that we're going to need to lock it into there and into here, but I think we will manage. And this little end piece that I designed for it, I cracked it in half while I was sawing it, so we'll just glue it back together and then glue it into there. Alright, that is pretty decent. So let's glue the front end and put it in here. So hardwood flooring, if you're willing to put the time into it, can be an interesting choice for van life. You can often find, as people remodel their houses and spend thousands and thousands of dollars to put this expensive hardwood flooring into their house, you can occasionally find on Craigslist or Kijiji that they have a couple of boxes for sale of just extra tailings, basically, from what they did. Because Hardwood floors are usually many, many square feet, and as such, it's not entirely uncommon to find up to 100 square feet that haven't even been used and are still in box from somebody who put it in their own house. I initially got some walnut flooring to use for this van because I thought that the van was about 5 feet wide and 10 feet long inside, and this walnut flooring was about 48 square feet that I bought. So, and it was very nice walnut for quite cheap. But the issue, as it turned out, was that the van is in fact not that big. It's almost 6 feet wide by 12 feet long. So as a result, I was far off with my estimate. I ended up putting in quite a bit of walnut, as I can show you guys on screen, before I realized that it wasn't enough. And then I tried thinking about maybe putting a second material, but it was so expensive to go out and buy more walnut versus just buying the scrap walnut that I decided maybe it would be best to just change plans and find a different type of wood. So I found this 72 square feet of maple, which ended up being the perfect amount as far as I calculated, but we'll see at the end, I guess. Let's place this in here now. We want to make sure all of those seams line up perfectly. Just kind of muscle it in for now. It looks absolutely perfect to me. It's pretty much as good as we're going to get it. So now, these little pieces of wood, we're going to use that to support the next round of wood. I might do a couple more rows before I shut off the camera, just so you guys can see how a more normal row would go. We're going to start once again right here, I think, and just keep going. There was a piece of metal flashing that went here, but it's kind of bent up, and honestly, I don't think it's really improving the look of the van that much. I think I'd rather bring the flooring out a little bit wider and then come up with my own covering at the end. So let's keep going. Keep rolling. Alright guys, so I lined up all the pieces that I want to put in, and as you can see, I put this piece upside down and marked where it would line up. So I'm going to go over and cut it, and then we'll glue this into place. Alright, so let's glue this puppy into place. I'm going to start by gluing the first tile. Like I said, it's more commonly how I do it, unless there's some other factor, is to start from this end, from a female end, I guess you could say. Might have to kick it a little bit back or forth, I'm not decided yet. Let's immediately do the next one here. And I guess if you can, maybe do all of your cuts before you do your gluing, because that way you can be fairly fast about your gluing. Always, of course, measure twice and cut once, especially if you have only a finite amount of the material and you need to make it go a long way. That prevents you from wasting material. I have had to waste some material, unfortunately, because there's pieces I've cut that can't or likely won't be put anywhere else. But at least they've been fairly small pieces, so I'm not losing that much square footage, I guess you could say. Put a bit of glue here. Let's put in the next board. Same story, different actors. We'll just put the glue right here. So to make sure that these all step in there correctly, we're going to use the hammer and give them a little tap. Let's give it a couple taps down here too. Alright, we'll have to see how it goes as we go along because we're having those slight wave in the material. Hopefully giving it a good smack has helped slightly with that. Now let's put in the last piece. The other thing is that as you add more of these pieces, you're increasing the rigidity of the entire structure. Alright, let's throw this one in. Alright, here we go. So guys, that is pretty much how I've done the hardwood flooring in my van. Basically the idea is to have it be one giant piece once you're done that's solid all the way along, and with the supporters underneath it, it shouldn't creak too much. I'm going to figure out that creak. I think it's caused by that little bit of trim touching it. But yeah, if you want to use this idea, go ahead. Hardwood scraps can be very cheap on used websites, and it can end up looking quite good and be very strong when done. All right, well, I'll see you later, guys, in the next video.